Hello, and welcome to the Cloud Computing 101 webinar presented by vExpert David Davis. I'm Christina Bartz from TrainSignal, and I'd like to take a minute to tell you what to expect in the next hour. First, I'd like to draw your attention to the questions box in your webinar control panel. David will be answering questions today, so feel free to submit your questions during the presentation. Also, if you have technical difficulties, let us know in the questions box and we'll do our best to assist you. Today's presentation will be recorded and available to view on our blog. We'll email all of you the link after the presentation. After you exit the webinar, you'll be prompted to take a short survey. TrainSignal wants to hear from you, so please take a few minutes to complete the survey. We will also be choosing one participant from today's audience to receive a copy of TrainSignal's CompTIA Cloud Essentials training by David. To be eligible to win, you must complete the survey that you will receive after the webinar. Be sure to fill it out. It only takes a few minutes. If you have any additional comments or feedback, you can email us at webinars@trainsignal.com. And with that, thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Here's David.
Thanks, Christina. Hi, my name is David Davis, and this is Cloud Computing 101. I might as well go ahead and do a hello and welcome to TrainSignal, since this is a TrainSignal webinar. And much of the content in this webinar is based on my CompTIA Cloud Essentials video training course. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. What we're going to talk about today, first off, I'll just do a little introduction about myself and who I am and my background in IT. I'll be talking about, obviously, cloud computing. This webinar is really for those of you out there who, don't really understand cloud computing or confused by cloud computing. And I think, that's a lot of IT people today. I'll cover the various forms of cloud computing. We'll talk about terminology that you need to know when it comes to cloud computing. I'll discuss how cloud computing requires a new approach or a new way of thinking to IT. We'll cover private, public, and hybrid clouds. We'll discuss concerns related to cloud computing, what makes up an infrastructure as a service cloud, how cloud is related to virtualization, because there's a lot of confusion around that. And then we'll end the webinar here with cloud certifications. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Just a quick note, you'll have to forgive me, my voice is a little hoarse today, so that's why I don't sound as I might normally sound on my video training courses. So who am I? Again, David Davis, been in the IT industry a long time. I worked for a privately held company out of Dallas for over 15 years, where we implemented Citrix Session and desktop virtualization, and we also had a very successful VMware virtualization, server consolidation project. We had a lot of users, a lot of locations, and it was there that I really gained, tremendous interest and even certifications around virtualization. Only recently, I would say, has cloud computing sort of come into the forefront, and now, more recently, I've been gaining exposure to cloud computing by, working with different service providers. I've written white papers for service providers. I've used service provider, clouds, given them feedback, evaluated service provider clouds, and really enjoyed learning about different forms of cloud computing. Also through creating my video training course for TrainSignal on vCloud Director Essentials. So, over the years, I worked as a network admin, Unix admin, Windows admin, IT manager, VMware admin, spoke at VMworld, obtained a number of different certifications, and wrote many different articles around virtualization. All right, so you may have known me from my video training courses for TrainSignal, vSphere 4, vSphere 5, troubleshooting, performance, and of course vCloud Director, and now CompTIA Cloud Computing Essentials. So that's who I am, and now let's talk about cloud computing. One of the quotes that I ran across actually in creating my CompTIA Cloud Computing Essentials course is this one here from Ken Olsen, who in 1977 was the president, chairman, and founder of DEC, big business mainframe computer company that was later bought by Compaq, who was later bought by HP. And his quote was, "There's no reason in the world anyone would want a computer in their home." And back then, you had these big mainframe computers. Everyone accessed the mainframe, and he said nobody would ever want a computer in their home. So over the years, of course, the evolution of the desktop computer, everyone had a computer in their home, right? We've all got laptops and desktops. Every person who works at a company just about has a desktop computer on their desk. But now things have started to come back around. This revolution has started to come back around where there's more and more server-based computing. So when I say server-based computing, it's similar to the mainframe in the concept that the computing is actually happening in the data center. And you're just viewing the screen. Back with the mainframe, it was just text that you would see on the screen. But today, of course, you've got a nice graphical environment. You're probably using Windows and doing it through server-based computing at many companies today. And server-based computing, some people call it the cloud. And marketers throw the term cloud around left and right, and that's what creates so much confusion. But again, back to this quote, things have come full circle. Maybe today there isn't a reason that you actually need a computer in your home. You could use a thin client device, and you could access your computer that's running in the cloud. And we'll be discussing that later. All right, so first I've got a few jokes. Cloud computing, people talk about it all the time. Here's the Dilbert joke where, the pointy-haired boss says, I hired a consultant to help us evolve our products to the cloud. And Dogbert, the consultant, says, blah, blah, cloud, 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 cloud. And the pointy-haired boss is just amazed. He says, it's as if you're a technologist and a philosopher all in one. And then another joke here. The pointy-haired boss says, let's implement cloud computing. So I have something to talk about. And Dilbert says, tell them we're evaluating it. That way we don't have to do any work. And the boss says, I like it when you do work. And he says, I thought you were leading by example. So the point is here that, everyone's talking about cloud, but no one really knows what it means. They just throw around buzzwords. It could be a consultant, could be the pointy-haired boss. Here's another joke. You've got a network diagram here. It looks relatively serious. You've got the database that can go in the cloud, the app server, your code, your mobile device, your PC, and yes, even the kitchen sink. Everything can go into the cloud. One more joke here. These guys are analyzing their business processes, maybe on a whiteboard. He says, last year we realized our processes were way too complex, so we just put them in the cloud, right? It makes the cloud just seem like this magical box. You can stick everything in, and it's so easy. But in reality, even though you might have seen the Microsoft commercial where they say, go to the cloud, take it to the cloud, everything isn't really, the cloud isn't really that magical. I don't want to burst your bubble. It is cool. It has many features and benefits that, you can take advantage of that can help you, but it's technology. It's today's current technology. It's not magic fairy dust. So that's what we'll be exploring is cloud computing. What is cloud computing? Well, VMware says cloud computing is an approach to computing that leverages efficient pooling of an on-demand, self-managed virtual infrastructure. So if we start at the last few words here, virtual infrastructure. So the cloud is actually built on the virtual infrastructure or virtualization. So you use the virtual infrastructure, which is your pool of resources, and you're able to take advantage of that or leverage that on demand, meaning whenever you need it or whenever, let's say, power users at your company or application owners at your company need to take advantage of computing, they can do it on demand, so as needed, and they can do it in a self-service way. In other words, IT doesn't have to be as involved. IT provides the virtual infrastructure and the resources. That virtual infrastructure can expand or it can contract when it's not needed, and this provides you and the company many benefits. So you might have some concerns immediately of giving any end users self-service access to computing power. In IT we were taught that's dangerous. We don't want to do that. But if it's done intelligently, maybe there's a request and approval process that you have to actually approve, or perhaps they have a limited scope of resources that you've carved out, let's say just for the developers. This can be done in a safe way, and by doing it, the developers or whoever it is at your company can get their job done much faster. The company can be more agile, more dynamic, and hopefully be more profitable thanks to cloud computing. And then you in IT can be freed up, let's say, to do some more productive or some more financially advantageous task for the company instead of just talking to someone and saying, okay, you need a server, how much RAM, how much CPU, I'm going to order it, I'll get it, I'll unbox it, I'll rack it, I'll load the OS, I'll load the applications, I'll call you in a couple months when it's ready, right? That's not efficient. So this is what cloud computing hopes to achieve for us. So cloud computing abstracts the business services from the underlying complex IT infrastructure. So think of your infrastructure today. You've got servers, storage, network, all these pieces of complex IT infrastructure that you and IT, struggle to put together to make useful for the business. Well, virtualization is able to pool all that together, and then this pool of resources can be consumed on demand, just like a utility, which gives the business what they need when they need it. So, if you think of utilities, you don't worry about, where your electricity comes from, or whether or not your phone is going to work today, or whether or not, there's water, coming out of the shower or the water spigot. These things just work, and you expect them to work, and that's what a cloud infrastructure is going to provide, is computing power on demand when it's needed. So you've seen all the different TV commercials. Microsoft might say, use Azure, it's what everyone needs. Or Microsoft has a commercial about photo editing, and they say, to the cloud, I'm going to edit my photos in the cloud. And then VMware, they're telling a different story. And then there's Amazon and Google. There's all these different people who are saying cloud computing, cloud computing. But as you might guess, these aren't all the same. Not everyone has the exact same thing. And there's a lot of different forms of cloud computing. So the three main forms of cloud computing are infrastructure as a service, or IaaS, platform as a service, or PaaS, and software as a service, or SaaS. And there's many more. So you could have desktop as a service, or disaster recovery as a service, or resource management as a service. The list could go on and on. But these are really the three main forms of cloud computing: infrastructure, platform, and software. So here's a nice pyramid, a nice graphic, thanks to the website there, fibertown.com. They made this nice pyramid that shows us at the bottom, you've got IaaS, or infrastructure as a service. And on the right there it says IaaS is for system administrators. Typically, system administrators are taking care of servers in the data center. They're used to administering the infrastructure or the systems. So IaaS is going to help them. That's the form of cloud computing that if you're a system admin, Windows admin, Linux admin, whatever kind of admin you might be, you take care of infrastructure. Cloud computing is infrastructure on demand. And it could be a public cloud, someone outside, or you could create your own internal private cloud. That's also an option. So examples of IaaS there are Rackspace, GoGrid, or Amazon Web Services, AWS. But there's many more. SkyTap, BlueLock, all the VMware vCloud infrastructure providers out there, data center providers. There's a long, long list of infrastructure as a service companies. We'll be delving more into that here in just a minute. Then there's platform as a service. And you notice on the right there it says platform as a service is for developers. So if you're a developer, say you're a .NET developer, you need a SQL backend to store your database data, for the .NET front end that you're writing. Then you need it hosted, let's say, on a web server that's going to, be accessible from everyone out there on the internet. Well, instead of having to purchase some servers to do that, put them in a data center, load operating systems, load the SQL database, load the web servers, and then put all your .NET code on there, think of you just being able to go to a provider that already has the database, already has the web front end. You just stick in the code, and within under an hour, you're up and running. You've got this application on the internet. So there's companies out there like Microsoft Azure. The others that are listed here, VMware's Cloud Foundry is one that I get a lot of exposure or questions about. These are all platform as a service, or PaaS, cloud computing offerings for developers. And then there's software as a service, or SaaS, and this is for end users. It says end customers there. I'd say end users. Really, it's anyone. It's you. It's me. Many of us are using Gmail, Google Docs, Basecamp, Salesforce, FreshBooks, just about any service that you use on the internet that replaces something that your company provided before or you had to do before, those are all software as a service offerings. So when Microsoft was demoing their cloud-based photo editing, that's software as a service. If Google's talking about Gmail, that's software as a service. Some of these are free. Some of them, of course, you pay for. So keep this in mind. 3 different main forms of cloud computing. And I'm going to spend most of my time in this webinar talking about IaaS, or infrastructure as a service, because typically most of the Train Signal audience is are Windows system administrators of some kind, or not just Windows, but all forms of system and network administrators who are going to be more interested in infrastructure cloud computing. So when it comes to the cloud, there's just so many different terms, to think about. Cloud architecture, computing, scalability, security, interoperability, utility services, grid computing. In the past, cloud computing may have been called grid computing, hosted services, application service providers. These were all the terms we've heard about in the past, and I don't want to say that those have just been renamed or rebranded, because technology has evolved so much since we had just application service providers that were providing applications as a service, even over private networks. Things have changed so much, and things are so much more dynamic and powerful today when it comes to cloud computing. So let's talk about some of these terms. So scale, or scalability. So you want your infrastructure to be scalable, right? If let's say you have 50 servers today, the CIO walks in and says, okay, we're going to open up, over the next year, we're going to open up 1,000 new locations. Can the infrastructure support it? Well, you want a scalable infrastructure that can. Maybe it can't support that many new locations, but it needs to be able to scale, and scale quickly, right? You need to be able to react. You want to be able to say yes when someone walks in. You don't want to be the holdup at your company to expansion and profitability. So you need infrastructure that scales, and that's something that infrastructure clouds can provide. They can provide scalability on demand. For example, the Olympics, the U.S. Olympics website, they use cloud computing. Why? Because one, it's scalable. Every 2 years or every 4 years, whatever it might be, they need to scale that infrastructure drastically. And it also needs to be elastic, or it needs to have elasticity. In other words, when it's done scaling, when it's done stretching out for the Olympics season, and the millions of people who are going to hit that website during that short time period, when it's done, it needs to be able to shrink that back down. So it needs to be able to stretch out and contract, and that's elastic computing. And you want the same thing out of your infrastructure. You need to have capacity, meaning the computing resources, the CPU, the memory, the storage, and the network capacity to provide for the virtual machines and your applications that the company demands. And then finally, agility. You need to be agile as an IT admin. You need to be able to support whatever the business needs when it needs it. So those are just some of the cloud terms that I want to make sure that you know. Here's a few others. Tenant, or multi-tenancy. So a tenant is, if you think of an apartment building or a condominium complex, you've got tenants who live in there, right? They're the people who rent out or lease out those apartments or those condominiums. So a public cloud, or even a private cloud, really needs to offer multi-tenancy. So if you think of that condominium complex, each of the condominiums are secured, right? They each have their own walls, they each have their own utilities, their own resources, they have a lock and a key, and they're secured and they're walled off. A public cloud or a private cloud needs to be able to do this for the tenants. So in a public cloud, it could be, my company, Train Signal, using part of it. It could be, your company, Widget XYZ, using another piece of it. We don't want to step on each other's resources. We don't want to have security issues, and that's what the cloud needs to provide. A secure, reliable, stable environment that also has plenty of capacity, elasticity, and performance that we need. If it's a private cloud, it's going to be the same thing. Maybe the manufacturing division needs one piece of your private cloud, the advertising division needs another piece, and maybe the sales division, they have another piece of the private cloud. You don't want those different divisions of your company stepping on each other's toes or having problems with capacity or security. Also, security concepts. If you've ever studied security, one of the well-known acronyms is CIA, which is, of course, well-known in security. But it stands for, in this case, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So your cloud needs to keep your data in that tenant confidential. It needs to have integrity, so you know that no one else has tampered with it. And it needs to be available. So you need to have the capacity. If something happens in the cloud needs to be resilient enough to, bring up those resources again, make them available so that they appear, to never go down. So that's some terminology. Now let's talk about how cloud requires a new approach. Traditionally in IT management, you've got these different silos. Services and assets are tied together in this complex, brittle, vertical stack that's hard to change and manage. So in an example, in my previous company I worked for, when we brought in new major applications in the company, say we're going to bring in a CRM system, a customer relationship management system, this is going to be a big application that's going to provide, thousands of users access to manage our customers. Well, what do we do when we need the resources or the computing power? We're going to have to order a new storage area network. We're going to have to order a new network switch. We're going to have to order, a cluster of, say, 4 new servers. And, most likely those users might even, need some new end-user devices. So we're going to install all this in the data center. It's a complex vertical stack just for that one particular application. I mean, how inefficient is that? If you think about cloud computing, it's a much different way of thinking. Instead of these vertical stacks, you've got horizontal layers. So at the bottom, you've got computing resources. So all the resources, storage, networking, memory, and CPU, these are all bundled together, working together in pools to provide computing power for every application in the company. And that's why it's so much more dynamic and powerful. I mean, if you think of the traditional vertical stacks there, think about how much wasted memory, CPU, disk, storage, and networking capacity is in each one of those vertical stacks, because you don't want to max out one of those stacks. Your application might run poorly. So you overbuild. Every stack is overbuilt. Well, in cloud computing, infrastructure cloud computing, you're pooling these all together with the hypervisor, with the virtualization layer, and then you create clusters, and on top of that, you create, let's say, virtual data centers. These virtual data centers can be assigned to your tenants. It could be an internal tenant, it could be a production web server farm, and it could be a development web server farm in a different tenant. But they're all sharing those resources. It's just so much more efficient. Now, another as-a-service concept you might have heard of is IT as a service. And I'm not going to try to even say it altogether. It's us, I guess. Anyway, IT as a service, that's typically how we say it, is really just providing everything in IT in a new way. So you have to think of IT in a new way, and cloud computing is part of IT as a service. But it's essentially thinking of your IT department as providing the resources for the company that they need on demand, as efficiently as possible, and as agile as possible. And a lot of companies have tried to adopt this way of thinking. They've tried to look at the IT department as, let's say, an outside company, a consulting company that's providing the company the resources they need. So cloud computing is an integral part of IT as a service. If your company needs, let's say, a new CRM application, well, you could go and use Salesforce.com. Salesforce.com is a software as a service application out in the cloud. If your company, let's say your developers need new development platforms for test and dev, let's say, to develop a new application, well, point them out to a platform as a service provider. Let's say that you need some new infrastructure. You're running out of server capacity. You've got some new applications that need to come online. Well, contact one of these cloud providers. You can create a VPN tunnel. You can connect to them from your internal private infrastructure, and you can essentially create a hybrid cloud where you're connecting to this remote data center, and you can run virtual machines and applications over there that work together with your own internal private applications. So IT as a service is just going to use cloud. And whether or not you adopt cloud computing today, if you think of your IT department as this service bureau for the company, it's just a much more efficient way of doing things. So I mentioned private cloud, public cloud, and hybrid cloud. This is a nice graphic from VMware.com that shows us VMware's picture of what private, public, and hybrid clouds look like. So we talked about public clouds. Amazon Web Services, that's a public cloud. You go over there, you subscribe, you give them a credit card, you bring up a virtual machine, you load an operating system, your applications, and it's on the internet. There you go. You're paying based on a formula that's based on how much you actually use that virtual machine. So that's a public cloud. Pretty simple to understand, really. It's just virtual machines or operating systems and applications running on someone else's infrastructure, and it's a pay-as-you-go service. Then there's private clouds. So we talked about this scalability, this automation, this elasticity, and self-service and resource pooling. All those concepts related to infrastructure clouds can be created in your own private cloud. So let's say you have a bunch of servers today, storage, you're running virtualization. On top of that, you can load a cloud director or a cloud automation layer that provides all those things, that provides self-service and resource pooling. So you can create your own private cloud. And then you could connect these two together. You could connect the private cloud to the public cloud. And that's what they call a hybrid cloud. So I mentioned that VPN tunnel that I could use to connect my private infrastructure to the public cloud. That's going to create a hybrid cloud for me. So again, just some basic terms you need to know when it comes to infrastructure cloud computing. All right, so here's some examples of infrastructure cloud providers. Of course, VMware has what they call vCloud powered. VMware doesn't actually have their own infrastructure cloud, but they have many cloud providers, and in fact, they have 10, approximately 10 or so data center cloud providers, and BlueLock is one of those. Just an example of one that I've used, Jake Robinson, who creates video training for TrainSignal, he works for BlueLock. He's in the process of creating a vCloud Director Organizational Administrator course, and he actually created a lesson in my vCloud Director Essentials video training course. So BlueLock is a great infrastructure cloud provider. Of course, there are others. And VMware, they use VMware's technology, so that's why they're vCloud powered, as they say. But I mentioned Amazon Web Services. Google now has their own cloud infrastructure cloud offering, and SkyTap actually is one that I've worked with in the past. And I was just talking actually to their marketing director last week, and he was saying that what SkyTap does to differentiate themselves is they make it easy to create that hybrid cloud. So it's all self-service. You could click, 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 and create a VPN tunnel back to, let's say, the router at your location, and then start powering on virtual machines, and you're connected to a hybrid cloud. There's not a lot to install. It's simple. It's easy, and I've tried it myself, in fact, and it is easy. But again, these are just a handful of the hundreds, maybe even 1,000 or so infrastructure cloud offerings out there today. Just some that I've used in the past. So what about cloud concerns? Of course, everyone, when they talk about using another service, something that you're already doing yourself, and now someone else is going to be doing it, that's a scary thought. I mean, you feel like you're losing control. You feel uncomfortable with it. You don't know, where's my data. right now, as a server admin, the CIO or the CEO walks in and says, where's the sensitive human resource data? Well, you as the admin could walk them in the data center, point to the server, and actually probably point to the disk drive that that human resource data is located on. So if someone were to steal that data, they could, of course, do it over the network, or they could walk in and steal the hard drive. So you know at all times where that data is. It's simple, it's clear cut. You know where your servers are, you feel comfortable, you can walk in the data center, you can look at the flashing lights, and that's a good feeling as a system admin. It makes you feel important, of course. I know, I mean, I can say that because I've done that. I've given data center tours and shown everyone the data center. This is our data. It makes you feel good. And the thought of moving all those servers somewhere else and just having an empty room, at corporate headquarters, that's a scary thought. But it doesn't have to be that drastic. You can start using cloud computing just by bringing up one server up in the public cloud, create a hybrid cloud, and then start, testing it for test and dev or something. It really doesn't have to be as scary as it might seem. You could put up, less critical data up there, like I mentioned, test and dev, to ensure that, if something did happen to the public cloud, for example, say GoDaddy goes down as happened this week, not a lot is lost out of that. And your cloud providers, you need to do a good job as well, due diligence, and make sure that they offer strong service level agreements, meaning if they do go down, they'll provide you a service credit. They'll give you money, just like actually GoDaddy did for me this week. So that's just one example, but of course if it's business critical data, you need to have even stronger service level agreements to ensure that there's high availability, to ensure that they have 4 nines or 5 nines of uptime, whatever it might be, to ensure that there's procedures and auditing followed at their data center to make sure that data isn't lost. You also might be thinking, as I often did, that I can always do something cheaper than I can pay someone else to do it. And in many cases that might be true. Of course, just picking up a low-end server and sticking it at the data center isn't going to cost you hardly as much as a 1 month or 1 year subscription to a virtual machine running in the cloud. But on the other hand, the virtual machine running in the cloud has so many more advantages. It might have high availability. It has a service level agreement. It has redundancy. It might have backups. It has high-speed internet access. All these things that just a standard, low-end server isn't going to provide. So make sure you're comparing apples to apples when you are concerned about cost, and what the cloud, offers. You also have to take into account the management cost of all those servers in the data center, the power, the cooling, the wiring, the cabling, the network ports, the SAN ports, the backup software. All these things need to be taken into account. You might be concerned about performance. Of course, not every application is perfect to be put into a public cloud today. Maybe you want to look at a private cloud first. Maybe private cloud is your best first step to just create a virtual infrastructure and a cloud director on top of it at your own company in your own data center. And that way you don't have many of these concerns. You're not concerned about where your data is, the performance of that data, the loss of control. You might even be concerned about losing your job. Hey, if everything goes to the cloud, then why do they need me? Well, the analogy here is right now you're administering a physical data center. Well, once it's in the cloud, you're still administering a virtual data center. Someone still has to administer those servers. It might be more efficient to do. It might cost a little more, but you're also not paying for the physical data center resources like electricity, servers, cooling, and hopefully it would free up your time to do things that are more financially beneficial for the company. Maybe there's a new application that you could implement that would save the company money or help the company get more sales instead of just sitting around administering the print server or the backup jobs or provisioning SAN LUNs. Once things were moved to the cloud, then conceivably you could be more efficient. So what makes up an infrastructure as a service cloud? And by the way, I'm getting a number of good questions here. I'm going to try to save those to the end. We're getting close, actually, to the end, and I want to allow plenty of time for questions, so I'll get to all these questions. So keep them coming. I will get to them. So an infrastructure as a service cloud, whether it's private or public, is going to have these features. First off, it's going to be 100% virtualized. You've got this virtual infrastructure. Maybe you're using Microsoft Hyper-V or VMware vSphere. You've got that virtualization layer. You've got centralized management. All your servers are running, let's say, the ESXi hypervisor. And with that, you're going to gain features like high availability, like resource pooling, like clustering, like distributed resource scheduler, where you can load balance what's happening in the virtual infrastructure. You've got flexibility like vMotion. You can move running virtual machines from one host to another. You've got storage vMotion. You can move running virtual machines, virtual disks from one SAN to another. So that's what the virtualization layer provides, and that's what actually powers, I would say, an infrastructure as a service cloud. Then on top of that, an application like vCloud Director is going to provide you the self-service portal, which is really just a web interface. You can go in as administrator, you can carve out virtual data centers, assign users, then those users can access the cloud through the same web interface. They can create virtual machines on the fly from a catalog of virtual machines that you've created or they've created, and very quickly, bring up new applications. They could clone a development server into a second development server. They could clone a production server into a development server. They've got this great flexibility that they don't have to come to you for anymore. You've got a service level agreement. Let's hope even internally, but definitely if it's a public cloud, they've got to offer you a service level agreement. You've got the flexible resource pooling and high availability, again, provided by the virtualization layer. So these are the things that make up an infrastructure as a service cloud, whether it's private or public. Other things that make up infrastructure as a service clouds, we've got more. Actually, I forgot about. There's even more here. The automation, right? Things are automated. Things can happen quickly. Perhaps you have scripts in place. Perhaps you're using like VMware Orchestrator to orchestrate or automate common activities. You've got high security as part of vCloud Director. When you implement it, you're going to implement VMware vShield, which has now been renamed VMware Networking and Security, or vCenter Networking and Security, something like that, with vSphere 5.1, which was just announced a couple weeks ago. But still, it's vShield, which is a virtual infrastructure security package that's going to create firewalls between these clouds, that's going to secure these clouds, that's going to allow one cloud to talk to another cloud across data centers. So it's really what creates this multi-tenancy and secures that so that one tenant or one user doesn't negatively affect another. You've got resource reporting and billing. So for example, VMware Chargeback is what can go in and report on the usage of all of these tenants who are using the cloud, and then let's say you're a service provider, you can bill them. Or if it's internal, if it's a private cloud, then you can bill, let's say, the divisions of your company, your internal tenants. And it doesn't have to be real money. It could be showback instead of chargeback. You're also going to have to change the way you think of IT. When someone comes to you with a new application, instead of thinking about, I'm going to have to buy some servers, think about the servers that are currently in your resource pools, that are currently in your clusters, see how much capacity you have remaining, and then create that virtual machine, put the application on it, clone it, put it in as a template or a vApp, and then provision it from there, or let them do the provisioning. And then educate the business to help them change the way they think about IT. IT needs to be more dynamic, more agile, and they also need to understand that IT is a partner in the business. So a common question and area of confusion is how cloud computing relates to virtualization. And I think I've already answered this, but server virtualization is required for infrastructure cloud computing. It's the virtualization layer loaded on top of the physical servers, the hypervisor, and the advanced features that is going to provide you that scalability, that elasticity, resource sharing, pooling, load balancing, high availability, the portability of the virtual machines. So you can, let's say upload a virtual machine from your server at your site. You could just upload it to the public cloud. You could upload a virtual machine from, VMware Workstation running on your laptop up to the public cloud as well. Cloning, the application catalog, the virtualization layer offers all these things. So what's your next steps? Of course, we're going to get to all these great questions. I'm really impressed with the number of questions. Next steps that I would recommend is to, learn virtualization. If you aren't already familiar with virtualization, now's the time to get started learning about it. Try out cloud computing. For example, SkyTop, they have a free trial. You can go out and try, loading up a virtual machine from their catalog at no cost. And then consider how the cloud can affect your company. Don't buy into all the marketing stuff of, hey, the cloud's great, it's going to, make your life easier, it's quick and it's easy. And certainly some of those things are true, but don't just buy into the marketing fluff because there's so much marketing out there. Really think about, could greater agility help your company? Could self-service help your company? Could looking at your data center and your IT resources in a new way help your company? The short-sighted CIO might say, we'll never need cloud computing. We do things ourselves, right? And I've had that attitude before, working for a privately held, small to medium-sized company. Hey, we do everything ourselves. We're not going to pay anybody to do it. But think about even if you did your own, private cloud, or even if you, spun up the new test and dev environment that they request in a public cloud. It's a great learning experience. It's a great way to show them that IT resources, aren't completely free. And I think it's, of course, short-sighted to, not consider cloud computing or what it can do for you. Certainly, it's still, immature. It's still young in many ways. It has a long way to go. But, for many companies, it's already been tremendously beneficial. The question I would ask that CIO, that short-sighted CIO, is, do you grow your own hair? Or do you grow your own food? Do you cut your own hair, change your own oil? No, these are all services we've outsourced to people, over time, because it's just more efficient for someone else to do it. And that may be the case for you with cloud computing. So the short answer is, who benefits from cloud computing? Well, conceivably everyone could, but more specifically, the companies that need that scalability, elasticity, they need to free up their IT staff, they need agility, and they're looking to be more efficient. Those are the companies that are going to benefit most from cloud computing. So what about cloud certifications? How can you show off, your cloud computing knowledge? Well, CompTIA has a good, all-around, unbiased, vendor-neutral cloud certification called CompTIA Cloud Essentials. I went and took the test, and it is a great all-around, cloud computing test. It doesn't test one particular company's technology. It just makes sure that you understand all the concepts of cloud computing and examples of applications and how they could help. So it's a great way to prove your knowledge, an entry-level exam. No other requirements actually to take it. And then there's the VCP 5 IaaS, which is a new VMware Certified Professional certification just around infrastructure as a service. So this is going to test your knowledge. First off, you have to have a VCP 5, which is a certification on VMware vSphere. So you need to have vSphere knowledge already and be certified on that. And then infrastructure as a service is going to test your knowledge of VMware vCloud Director. And of course, I created training courses for both of these different certifications. vCloud Essentials, TrainSignal has the course we're giving away today. And then the VCP 5 IaaS, I actually created the vCloud Director Essentials video training course before IaaS was even announced as a VMware certification. So it's not a one-to-one map, but it's also a good all-around preparation for learning about vCloud Director. Quickly, here's the product page for the course that we're giving away today, my Cloud Essentials CompTIA certification course. And then, of course, if you want to get started learning about virtualization, there's my vSphere 5 training, which is a great way to learn VMware vSphere. So here's the things we covered. You were on the call. You heard me covering them. I'm not going to read them, At this point, we've got 15 minutes left, and I'd like to jump into questions. So let's see, give me just a second here, and I'm just going to go in reverse order that I received these. And some of them are a little long, so let's see, let me read these. On cloud concerns for performance, you mentioned a private cloud would be an ideal first step rather than the public cloud. Isn't it true that for private cloud, the costs are more, and you would also need skilled virtualization experts and staff, and the risk factor is higher? Good question. You know, I think both private and public clouds are good ways, of course, to get started learning about cloud computing, but they each have their own pros and cons. Let's say I wanted to try public cloud computing. Within 30 minutes, I could probably be over to Amazon Web Services or SkyTab or Google, and I could bring up a virtual machine on the public cloud, give them my credit card, and I'm good to go. I'm trying out public cloud, quick and easy. So that's easy. Now, how well is a test of that for your company in your company's applications? Probably not a very good test, but it's a great way to learn, of course. And then you've got private cloud. So private cloud, yes, as the person asking the question referred to, yes, you do need a virtual infrastructure. Yes, creating a private cloud is going to be relatively costly. Do you need, virtualization experts? You do need virtualization expertise, yes. But you could also try it out at no cost. VMware has a 60-day evaluation of the vCloud suite, they're now calling it, 100% free. You could take a couple physical servers, a small shared, storage array, a low-end like an Iomega or Synology. You could install that 60-day evaluation of vSphere, vCenter, and vCloud Director, and you could evaluate 60 days, for 60 days at no cost. Well, of course, the cost of the servers and the storage. You could evaluate VMware vCloud Director and create your own private cloud. So, there are low-cost ways to learn about each of these, and I think it just depends on what direction you think your company would be most likely to go. If you don't already have a virtual infrastructure, then you might be looking at public cloud instead. All right, moving on to the next question. Someone else asked about what's your plan for outages? So what happens if the public cloud, I'm assuming they're referring to, what happens if the public cloud goes down? All right, well, I mean, that's a great question. And certainly that is, going to be one of the concerns. And that's why I would say if you're considering public cloud, well, put up, your test or development servers up there. Run it for 6 months or a year and just see, how reliable is that compared to your own internal infrastructure. Certainly your own internal infrastructure could go down as well. You could have your own outages. And, what's your plan internally? Do you have a disaster recovery site? Do you have offsite backups? All these are things you would want to take into account and discuss with your public cloud service provider. What sort of availability do they have? What sort of replication or disaster recovery services do they offer? And keep in mind that let's say you're talking about moving your entire enterprise data center to a public cloud. That's not something you're just going to do with like Amazon Web Services. That's something you're going to do with a provider, let's say like BlueLock, where you're going to sit down, you're going to discuss diagrams. It's going to be a lot of work. It's a serious undertaking. They take it very serious. So, don't just think, hey, I'm going to move all my, 100 servers to the cloud tonight because you want to take into account, things like outages, disaster recovery, backup, high availability. Good question. Moving on, next question. Isn't cloud security only as good as the vendor security protocols? A big concern are hackers getting access to corporate data. Absolutely. Security is a concern with the public infrastructure clouds. I mean, of course, it's also a concern with your private, infrastructure cloud. I mean, many or most companies have multiple sites. They're transmitting sensitive company data across perhaps a public wide area network, maybe using something like MPLS. MPLS, even though it's a private wide area network protocol, has no security. Unless you encrypt that data across the wide area network, it's not secured, any more secured than it is sitting on the local disk. So you want to take into account these things in the private cloud as well. You need to encrypt your sensitive company data in the private cloud, or in the public cloud, I mean, just as much as you would in the private cloud. So yeah, certainly something you would want to talk to a cloud service provider about. And maybe if you have sensitive data, you want to keep that in your own private cloud at your own company data center, and then only use the public cloud, connect the two together with to create a hybrid cloud, and only use the public cloud for less critical, less sensitive data. Okay, next question. Can you please redefine private cloud? What are the components and how is it different from a regular IT data center? So if you think of a regular IT data center, you've got servers, storage, networking, you've got the Windows operating system, most of us do, or Linux, loaded on each of the servers, and then your applications on top. So what could turn that into a private cloud? First off is the virtualization layer. So you want to load, instead of the Windows operating system on your servers, you load something like Hyper-V or VMware vSphere. And then on top of that, you're going to virtualize your servers and applications inside virtual machines. And then you're going to use a cloud director, let's call it, an application that's going to provide the self-service, the chargeback, the multi-tenancy, all of these pieces to coordinate off it and create this private cloud. So it's really the virtualization layer that creates the scalability, the resource pooling, the flexibility, agility, high availability, all those things, combined with the Cloud Director software on top of that. Hope that answers the question. Moving on, are there banking institutions currently using public cloud services? That is a good question. I do not recall specifically a bank using one. For example, VMware and Microsoft, they both have case studies around cloud computing that you can go check out, and so do the public cloud providers like BlueLock and like SkyTab. They have their own case studies published, and so I would go to their websites and look under case studies and see if there are any banks. Now, I do know that the New York Stock Exchange has created community clouds with institutions. So there are financial institutions using public clouds. Maybe I shouldn't say public clouds. Maybe they're really community clouds. So community clouds are really shared public cloud infrastructures. They're not 100% public. Maybe you call them semi-private. Semi-private clouds, meaning they're clouds that are just shared among a group of organizations. For example, another example of community clouds would be, let's say that 10 counties in your state get together and they create their own cloud that's shared among the 10 counties to save money and provide them greater, agility. That's an example of a community cloud. It's not public, but it's not completely private to just one company. It's a shared community cloud. All right, so another question. How do you network this local network to the cloud network? So the answer is when you create a hybrid cloud, there's really two ways. One is going to be you'll use a VPN, a virtual private network, to connect your company's local network to the public cloud provider, and your public cloud provider has to support that feature. I'm not saying every cloud provider supports that. So one option is VPN. Another one would be a dedicated circuit. So if you are really taking public cloud computing serious and you want to connect, let's say, your 5 company locations, you could use a dedicated wide area network circuit through a service provider, of course worked out with your public cloud computing company. And they're hosting, or they're running all of your servers in their virtual infrastructure in your own virtual data center in their public cloud, and all that data, transactions, and end user virtual desktops even, let's say, or end user email transactions, whatever it is being sent over those wide area network circuits. So again, back to the Q&A. You connect your local network to the public cloud through either a VPN or a private WAN circuit, or maybe you just have internet-facing servers. If you could put a web server on a public cloud infrastructure, and you could create an access rule that only the IP address from your company's site can access that web server, or it could be a public-facing web server completely. Okay, I covered the community cloud model. Another question here. Could you tell us a little bit about the average prices or expenses of using the cloud? Well, today, to be honest, that's one of the biggest questions remaining, is how is pricing calculated in the public cloud? Because to be candid, every public service provider, every public cloud provider has a different pricing model, and it's still very confusing, even to me. Every time I talk to a different cloud provider, I say, how do you price this again? And for companies like Amazon or SkyTab, they've got like specific formulas. So like SkyTab has a SkyTab virtual machine, or an SVM, and an SVM, 1 hour of usage for a SkyTab virtual machine costs you X amount, and they tell you exactly how much it is. And the more you use, the less you pay per hour. And the SkyTab virtual machine has, I'm not going to quote it, but let's say, one virtual CPU, 1 gig of RAM, and one, 100 gigs of storage. Those aren't the exact numbers, but it's a very specific exact number of resources, and it costs you exactly this much per hour. And Amazon works the exact same way. Amazon Web Services, on their website, they've got a pricing guide. They break down the exact formula. But when it comes to other service providers, for example, the vCloud data center providers, most likely it's going to be more custom, where you talk to them, you say, hey, I've got 100 physical servers, I want to move them to the cloud. They talk to you, they ask you some more questions, and they come back and say, okay, it's going to cost you this much per month. It's not a per hour or a per minute rate like some of these other more consumer-based public cloud services. Okay, 2 minutes left. Let's see some more questions here. If the feds want to confiscate a server in the cloud, do they bypass the company and go directly to the hosting company, or do they have to go through the business that owns the data? Of course, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know the answer to that, to be 100% sure. I would, and I hate to even guess. So I think I'll leave that to between you and your cloud provider. I mean, my gut feeling would be the feds, I guess, could just go to the hosting company and take the server. But then if you weren't at the data center, they could probably come to your data center with a warrant and take the server out of your data center too. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. Wish I could help a little bit more, but I'm not sure. Okay, sorry, which website uses cloud computing, of whose example was given regarding scalability? A lot of different websites use cloud computing. The example I gave was the Olympics website. I've been told that they use cloud computing every year, but there's so many case studies. If you go out to these vendor websites like Amazon Web Services, they've got a ton of case studies about all the different companies out there that use their cloud. In fact, TradeSignal, our infrastructure is hosted in the public cloud. Okay, another question. Can you identify resources for IT compliance and security issues regarding cloud computing? There is a cloud security organizational group out there. I don't recall the acronym right now, but if you go out and use your search engine to search for cloud security organization, I'm sure you'll find it. If you want to email me David at trainsignal.com later. I'll see if I can find it if you don't see it. Let's see. What other questions do we have? We've got, we're exactly at 2 minutes. I'll take one more question here. It says our company goes through regular IT security audits. It appears that using a public cloud would drastically complicate IT security and audit process. You would need to look at the internal security of the infrastructure as a service and the security of the cloud provider. How do cloud providers handle security audits? That is a great question. Only recently has the Auditors Association recognized virtualization. Only recently have they said, yes, it's okay if your servers are virtualized. So it's going to be some time before they recognize the public cloud. So in that case, I would, talk to the different public cloud providers, maybe talk to other companies in your industry, talk to your auditors, and tell them that you're considering doing this, and how could you prove to them, with the help of the infrastructure as a service provider, that the audit requirements are being fulfilled. All right, so that's the last question. There might be some more questions I didn't get to. I apologize. I will circle back and look at those, and I might be emailing you the answer if I haven't answered your question already. Thanks to everyone who joined us today. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your time. And if you have any more questions, again, I'm David at trainsignal.com. And with that, I'll hand it back to Christina.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. We thank you again for attending and for your participation. If you have any other questions, feel free to email us at webinars@trainsignal.com. As a reminder, today's webinar was recorded and will be available to view at trainsignal.com/blog/webinars. We will also email you the link by the end of this week. And remember, please fill out the survey for a chance to win a copy of David's Train Signals CompTIA Cloud Essentials training. We'll email the winner by the end of the week as well. Thanks again and have a great day.